Hello, everybody. This is Todd Dewey from the hit show Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel. And my source of radio and all truckers news, I go to tncradio.live.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Train Station. This is tncradio.live. I'm Bill Walter, along with my co-host Jim Leaders, and our guest today is Bob Holzweiss, and he has an interesting history. He's been a very busy man, anything involving the Penn Central Railway, all the way up to the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas. He has a vast history. Bob, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here and look forward to visiting with you and Jim.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, first we want to start out. We know you obviously through the library and a number of functions that have gone on up there, but kind of tell us about your young life. How did you get involved in railroading? Did you have family in railroading? Did you ever work for the railroad? Tell us about your history.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Actually, I did not have anybody in my family involved in the railroad. My dad bought me a model train set when I was very young, and I imagine a lot of your listeners probably had the same experience. And I immediately took to it. I guess my personality meshed with watching trains go around in circles. I don't know. And then my dad realized that he had a winner in a hobby that I could pursue or we could pursue together. And I think he certainly had an interest in it, but not at the depth that I did. Right. And I got into very early model trains. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, when I was growing up, it was a lot different than it was today. It was a lot easier to get into the hobby. And then really what kind of cemented my interest in the railroads, and particularly the Penn Central, is my dad used to take me to what I call watch the trains or visit the trains when he returned home from work. And that usually meant we lived in Peekskill, New York, which was on the former New York Central, then Penn Central Hudson Division along the Hudson River. And we lived about 15 minutes from Croton Harmon, where the electrics out of New York City changed over to diesel power. Mm-hmm. And so he would take me there. And there was at the station, Penn Central had built these high-level platforms, but because it was Penn Central, they were incomplete. And there was a part of the platform that was raised up that was wide open. You could go out there and you could see the vast expanse of the yard, watch all the action. And he would take me there, and we would stand there during usually the evening rush hour and watch all the action as the commuters came in. And we were out of the way, kind of out of sight, out of mind as far as the employees were concerned. And I really got into it then, and I really fell in love with Penn Central, which I know your listeners are going to think that's really weird, but that's the railroad I grew up with. Right. On occasion, he would take me to Rye, New York, which is on the former New Haven, and we'd watch the evening commuter rush there, which was a lot more intense. There's a lot more Amtrak activity, of course, because that was part of the Northeast Corridor. And every once in a while, he would take me to North White Plains, just where my grandmother lived. And we would go to the train station, North White Plains, which was on the former New York Central Harlem Division. So no matter where I was totally immersed in Penn Central as a young man, did the model railroad thing, and sort of kept it very much a hobby. Read Trains magazine, subscribed to Rail Pace, which is a Northeastern Railroad hobby or informational magazine, and really kind of kept it on the lowdown. And when I wasn't working, I was practicing a hobby, and that's how I got started.
Gotcha. Was the 20th Century Limited still running at that time up there at Croton Harmon?
No, that ended in December of '67. Before the Penn Central merger, the New York Central had eliminated almost all of their name trains. They had really kind of reduced their core system to what they called Empire Service, and that was frequent but short trains between New York City and Albany, and then some went beyond Albany to Buffalo. There still were some long-distance trains, but not nearly the level of just 10 years earlier. So right. They were short and quick, and this was, I might add, I caught the very tail end of the P Motors, which was the former Cleveland Union Terminal Electrics, and they would handle the trains out of New York City for Amtrak, and they would switch over to E units and later FL9s at Harmon. And that was one of the earliest memories I have of going down there and watching the crews do the engine swap.
Yeah, those were some unique electric engines.
They were like watching a centipede go down the track.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, from a childhood memory of watching the Penn Central and all that, later on you wrote articles and got more involved with the history of Penn Central and its collapse. Can you kind of tell us a little about how you got involved in all of that?
Sure. I came to Texas in went to undergraduate. Let me begin at the beginning.
Okay.
I attended undergraduate up in New York, in Olean, New York, which was incidentally on the former Erie-Lackawanna main line between New York and Chicago, then Conrail. When I graduated, I came to graduate school in Texas, and not to be flippant, but I got here as fast as I can. I'm not originally from Texas, and a lot of people rib me about that. 31 years later, I'm still here. I went to graduate school, Texas A&M. My original plan was to become a college professor, like most people who go to graduate school. I was in the history department.
Right.
And a major professor there, his name was now deceased. His name was Harold Livesey, was a business historian. And he worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad and actually quit the railroad leading up into the Penn Central merger because he saw with his own two eyes that it wasn't going to work. And he went to graduate school because of the merger. And him and I got to know each other. And I suggested to him that I really had an intense interest in the Penn Central. And he and I talked, and he suggested I write on the Penn Central, specifically on what I call the political economy of Penn Central. And that is the interaction between the economics of the railroad industry in Penn Central specifically and the political side of the house, that is the federal and state governments in which where the Penn Central operated. And there's a vast literature out there of primary sources mainly that I could tap into because, of course, the Penn Central went bankrupt, and the bankruptcy court, the bankruptcy continued into 2011 is the last time I saw any documents produced by that court. So it went on a long time with a vast record. And of course, the government saves everything. So it was very, I wouldn't say easy, but certainly not as difficult as I expected to find the necessary documents. So my doctoral dissertation ended up being the political economy of Penn Central.
How many pages was that?
It's funny you should say that because my Harold, my chairman, when we sat down and we chatted about it at the beginning of this project, he said, you can write 330 pages, which at the time was considered to be one bound volume in a lot of a library book, essentially. Oh, and he said, if you write more than that, I'm not going to read it. And if you write less than that, it's incomplete. So that was my target because he had a very valid point. He said, when you select a topic for historical inquiry, you need to be able to kind of put some parameters or some guardrails around it, know where you're going and know how you want to get there. And that middle part is what you want to explore during your research. You want to have a theory and a thesis, but you don't want to be so married to it that you're going to hammer the documents into the thesis rather than let the documents speak to the thesis. And he said, if you get between 300 and 330 pages, that's probably a solid treatment of the subject. And if you go over that, you're probably rambling. And if you go under that, you probably haven't done it service. And so that's really where I was. And I landed right at actually 329.
Wow.
Close enough for government.
Close enough. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So you went to school, you left there and came to Texas, go to school at Texas A&M.
Yep.
All right. But then you ended up actually going to work for the college. Is this, or you went to work for the library at the college? Is that right?
So I was working at A&M as a teaching assistant. That was my first 5 years. And then I took a little detour into the private sector to try to put food on the table for 1 year. I delivered hay of all things. And I learned that that line of work was not suitable for me for the rest of my life.
I was about to say, welcome to Texas if you're delivering hay from New York. Wow.
Yeah. In the summer of 1995, I drove from Franklin, Texas to Houston every day with 300 square bales. It was quite an interesting and eye-opening summer.
Where is Franklin, Texas? I don't even know where that is.
It's up there by Kilgore, isn't it?
No, it's about, I'm in Bryan College Station, so it's probably about 35 miles to the northeast of here, up by Hearn. It's about 10 minutes from Hearn. Yeah. So it was about a 2.5, 3 hour drive down to Houston every day and then back. So it was a lot of reflective time, I like to tell people, when I'm alone in the car or the truck.
Gotcha.
So,
I guess you followed some mainline trackage along there?
Oh yeah. The what is now the Union Pacific Hearn sub, Franklin to Hearn, and then of course the line former SP from Hearn to College Station, and then I used to drive down 290 all the time down into Houston.
Right.
That's before the new additions were all built and all that. So I got a lot of quality windshield time watching trains go by as I was working.
Oh, darn.
No, darn. Yeah. I guess you got to, as I used to tell people, you got to make hay when the sun shines. And that's what I was doing. I was making it and delivering it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
As far as the work at the library is concerned, in 1996, very early 96, let me back up. President Bush had decided to locate his library at Texas A&M University, and they brought a very small staff down in 1993 to sort of set up the very early, what we call the library project, which was located in a building away from where the library is located now. And in 1995, late 95, early 96, they wanted to begin staffing up because they were going to open the library and the museum in 1997. And so in early 1996, I applied. And in June of 96, I began at the library, which incidentally is part of the National Archives and Records Administration. So it's a federal facility located on the campus of Texas A&M University. And attached to that is the George Bush School of Government and Public Service, which is a Texas A&M University run operation. It's a graduate program only. And then the George and Barbara Bush Foundation is also located in a building adjacent to the library. That's our private fundraising arm. And that's what we call the Bush Center, those three major organizations.
Gotcha. I'll tell you, we'll continue that story in just a moment. Hang on. Let's take a quick break real quick here. This is the train station on tncradio.live. Our guest today is Bob Holzweiss at Texas A&M University's George H.W. Bush Presidential Library, talking about his history and love of trains. We'll be right back.
Great leaders challenge their people not to stop at the first right answer. Tighten the Lug Nuts is the book that will help you move past that first right answer to be more effective, more productive, and more successful. This book serves as a blueprint that can be easily applied by leaders, entrepreneurs, truckers, owner-operators, all of us in our everyday lives. This is one of the best leadership books you can read to help you accelerate towards your personal and professional goals. Plus, a portion of the proceeds will be donated to truckerschristmasgroup.org. Visit TightenTheLugNuts.com to order your copy today.
Hey, rideshare drivers and gig economy workers, the host of TNCRadio.live, the Rideshare Rodeo Podcast, and the Gig Economy Podcast come together for news, talk, music, stories, laughs, and more. We're live Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the train station on tncradio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop, along with Jim Leaders, my co-host. Our guest today is Bob Holzweiss, and he works at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum in College Station, Texas, and is an avid rail fan. We learned about his early life in the first segment. So, Bob, we are now up to around 1996, and you started as an archivist?
Yes, an archivist at the library. Yeah, Bill, I did. I would call that a junior level or entry level position. My job was it was exclusively to what we call process the documents of the Bush administration and make them available for research. There's a long and involved legal history leading up to where we were in 1996, and kind of dictated what we could and could not release. The Freedom of Information Act, of course, is a tool that all Americans have, or everyone has, in order to get documents from their government, and we would respond to those. And when we opened for business in January of 1998, we immediately had a crush of researchers, mostly academics and reporters, looking to dive deeper into the Bush administration, the major events that happened during that time. And there were many, of course. Many of your listeners probably remember the first Gulf War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and other major international events of that nature. And that's what people were interested in seeing. And so for the first probably 8 years I was at the library, that's what I did. Myself and my colleagues, and there were wonderful people I worked with, learned much from them. We made those documents available in our research room and occasionally via digital publication. But in 2004, I was promoted to the supervisor of the archives, and the nature of my work changed. Rather than actually being a line and staff archivist, I moved into more of a supervisory role and sort of set the direction of the archival department. And we started doing we did a lot of the same things, but I was more in a decision maker role rather than a processing role. And at that time, in 2004, we were about 6 years after we had opened. And the director of the foundation at the time, a gentleman named Dr. Roman Papaduke, wanted to kind of reinvigorate the library and do something splashy to get the local population interested in coming back. Because a lot of people who live in Bryan College Station, they were very supportive of the library. They really were interested in it coming, very thankful and grateful for it. But after 7 years, most of them had said, yeah, I've been there and I've done that. Show me something interesting, something new, something splashy. Right. And so he solicited ideas from a variety of people, the staff, and I put together a proposal for a railroad exhibit. And much to my surprise, then and now, it was accepted. And I was, while I was doing the supervisory role in the archives, I was also going to design a major railroad exhibit. And I believe, Bill and Jim, you visited that exhibit when it was up and running. It ran from 2005 to 2006 at the library. As part of that exhibit, we also wanted to do some big, what I would call public relations, or try to get the word out and get as many people in from as far away as possible. Right. And Dr. Papaduke asked if I knew anyone that might want to be what we called the gold sponsor. And so he approached Union Pacific, with which President Bush had already had a relationship. And I would say President Bush was interested in trains and railroads, but I wouldn't say he was a rail fan as we would understand the term, but he certainly appreciated the railroad industry. When he was a young man, he traveled on trains all the time. He really enjoyed riding trains. It was the quality of it. And Union Pacific had done several trips with him and his family on their private business cars. Right. So there was some relationship there already. And Dr. Papaduke brought myself and my boss at the time, my boss then and now, to Omaha, where we met with the Union Pacific CEO, President and CEO, Richard Davidson, who warmly welcomed us, and he agreed to have Union Pacific underwrite the exhibit. During that conversation, I presented the idea to him of creating what is now the 4141. Now, understand, I didn't have the courage to ask Union Pacific to paint a locomotive any other color other than armor yellow. They had done so few, this didn't make much sense for me to ask for something like that. So the initial concept was to have what we would consider a Union Pacific standard locomotive with just some additional graphics on it, right, advertising the exhibit and talking about the library. It was, and also, instead of the American flag, having the Texas flag, where the American flag is currently positioned on the locomotives. Right. I got this idea from working at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum. I interned there for 3 summers from 92 to 95. And CSX at the time was doing what I would call a very scaled down version of heritage locomotives. And they were trying to sort of ingratiate themselves with local political leaders. And they unveiled at the museum a locomotive called the Spirit of Maryland. It was very subtle. There was some nice graphics on it. It was painted as a CSX engine. If you Google it, you can probably find pictures of it at the museum, actually, brand new, out of the box, looking good. And it was a great public relations event. And that's what I was anticipating we would do with the 4141.
Right.
There at the time, by the way, there was a 4141, an SD70M or SD70 was already in existence, and my request was that they would just simply repaint that locomotive and then put the graphics on it. We would have a very small ceremony, and they'd send it around the system.
Right.
Well, what ended up happening is they handed it the project to their public relations firm called Bailey Lowerman, which is an Omaha-based firm, I believe. And they ran with it, and they realized, okay, the presidential library. And they took the concept and developed what we now know as the 4141 by using the colors of Air Force One and the graphics, with the George Bush Library on the side, the presidential seal on the front. I was obviously blown away by the whole thing. Exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, it is. And Union Pacific really went above and beyond. I mean, they were a tremendous partner, tremendous sponsor of the exhibit, and I still to this day can't believe that they took this concept. And incidentally, maybe your listeners know this. The original concept for Air Force One was designed during the Kennedy administration by a industrial designer named Raymond Loewy, who
we remember him. He was famous.
Him.
Yeah.
Right. Kennedy consulted with him personally, sat down in the Oval Office. I have the documents from this meeting from the Kennedy Library of all places.
Wow.
And so of course, Raymond Loewy cut his teeth in designing railroad equipment.
Right.
And among other things, he was a very famous industrial designer. So when the colors of Air Force One kind of made the circle all the way around from the plane to the train, where Loewy really got his start, it kind of closed the circle for me. I'm not sure they knew that, but when I saw it, that's exactly what I thought, because of where he started in the railroad industry, and now his Air Force One has arrived on a train. So it was very secret the way they did this. They painted it up at the Wisconsin and Southern. They contracted with them in Horicon, Wisconsin, wrapped the locomotive, very secretly moved it to Texas with a business car so they could observe it the whole way. And Union Pacific, it was amazing. They set up a tent. They rolled the locomotive into the tent in a parking lot, which is normally used for buses. Right. At Texas A&M University. You may have been there, Bill.
We were there with Steve Lee and the president and his family. Yeah, it was.
We were there.
They had a smoke machine, dramatic lighting, a big curtain, and I think based on the President Bush's and Barbara Bush's reaction, I think they were absolutely blown away by the whole presentation.
If I recall, Bob, Dick Davison at the podium had this HO model of the 4141, and he presented that first to President Bush, and then he said something like, "Oh, wouldn't you like a bigger engine?" Or how did that
see the real thing, or something like that?
That is exactly how it happened. He had a O-scale model, and there was a cover on it, and he kind of pulled the cover away like a magician and said, "What do you think, Mr. President?" And I read the look on President Bush's face, and he looked pretty disappointed, actually. And he said, "Oh, sir, we need to do something a little better than that." And then the big curtain, like we're opening The Price is Right kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And you win the big locomotive. And and I think at that moment his face lit up, and Mrs. Bush's face lit up, and my face. I mean, you had to hold me down. I was going to float out of the room.
So they had no idea that the engine was behind that curtain. Right?
No.
Wow.
And if they did, they faked it pretty well.
Wow.
Everybody in the room just was in awe. I mean, when that curtain opened and we saw that engine back there, I mean, I'll never forget it.
It was tremendous.
Yeah.
It was a really kind of a special moment in my life, seeing that all come to fruition. And certainly I want to be totally clear. Union Pacific and their public relations people did all the design work. They planned it, they executed it, and all that. It was just I made the ask. Let's put it that way. And
there was a lot of rail fan gossip about this engine coming down with the tarp on it, and everybody knew something was really big was going to happen, but nobody had any idea it was going to be that big.
Bob, question: how did you get that locomotive from the main line into the parking lot.
Okay.
How did
So-
that? I'll tell you. Hold on. Let's take a break.
Sure.
We got to take another break here, real quick, and we'll talk about how you move a locomotive into the parking lot at Texas A&M University. This is the train station on TNCRadio.live. Our guest today is Bob Holzweiss of Texas A&M University George Bush Presidential Library. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hey, rideshare drivers and gig economy workers, the host of TNCRadio.live, the Rideshare Rodeo Podcast, and the Gig Economy Podcast come together for news, talk, music, stories, laughs, and more. We're live Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop, along with my co-host Jim Leaders. Our guest today is Bob Holzweiss. He works at the Texas A&M George Bush Presidential Library and Museum. And Bob, I got to tell you, before we continue to the locomotive story of how to get into the parking lot, I've been through the museum a number of times, and it's very touching to me because the aircraft that George Bush flew in World War II is the exact same aircraft that my father flew.
Really?
Yes, in World War II. My father fought in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and he was on the USS St. Lo, which was sunk by a kamikaze. And he didn't work right with George Bush, but they were kind of in the same area, I believe, around the same time. But yeah, it was the same kind of aircraft. Same color and everything. So just wanted to pass that along. I love it over there. So, okay. So we left off on the last segment. We're talking about how you move this large locomotive from the Union Pacific Main Line into the parking lot of a school. Tell us, how did that come about?
So those of your listeners may be familiar with A&M. The Union Pacific former MP Main Line bisects the campus, separates East and West Campus. And at the time, there was a siding just north of campus to a building called the Fred Dollar Building. It used to be the commissary for A&M, and my understanding is they used to get freight deliveries there, and this was before my time. They stopped getting deliveries, but the switch was still in, and the track was still in, and the track ended right next to the parking lot where we were going to do this event. And so Union Pacific had their maintenance away folks bring panel track, and they simply extended this siding into the parking lot, probably 100, 150 yards, and then pushed the locomotive under the tarp, built the tent around it, and then prepared for the for the display. I don't know what A&M did with all the buses. There's several, probably 80 or 90 buses that would normally overnight in that lot. They went somewhere, but I don't know where they went. A&M again stepped up for this project and really was super supportive. I can't overstate enough how these major organizations that you think, man, it's hard to get them to work together. They work together so well. It was a wonderful thing to watch and be a part of.
Fascinating. And yeah, like I said, we did see the ceremony where you unveiled the locomotive. The family got up there and got their pictures and everything. So, I mean, what an honor to be able to, obviously you met the president and first lady.
Sure.
And I mean, what an honor to get to meet them and know them and work at the library. That's just got to be just amazing. They
were, and as our foundation director likes to say, before they went to heaven, they were very much involved in the library, and they were delightful to be around. They were extraordinarily generous. If you've come to the library, you'll see so many things, very personal things that they've donated to us that we have on display, from clothing to jewelry to paper. President Bush gave us all of his handwritten letters that he sent to his mom and dad, and one to Barbara during World War II. And how precious is that? And what an important historical record it is. And so it's been absolutely my pleasure to work there for now going up on 25 years.
Wow. And of course, if people don't know it, George and Barbara and their daughter, young daughter, are buried right there on the campus, right next to the library. It's a beautiful area, very serene, and I visited it. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And what an honor.
You want to speak a moment about the funeral train and what a big deal that was?
Sure. So the locomotive, the 4141, was in service briefly, and then Union Pacific really sort of about 2010 2011, determined, I think, with President Bush and his office, that they would use it to pull the funeral train. Those of you who have any role in the military, who handle these kind of things, that are listening, realize that there's a huge plan that is put into place well before our president passes away. And I really became acquainted with this plan in late 12 and early 13. And really more in 2014, when I was promoted to deputy director of the library, and then my portfolio expanded to the funeral planning part of what we were going to do at the library. And so the last part of the journey for President Bush, of course, would be from Houston to College Station. The 4141 would be pulling the train. It was a extraordinarily detailed plan. The Secret Service was very interested in making sure there was no room for error. They knew there was going to be a lot of people along the right of way. They insisted that law enforcement protect every crossing with at least one law enforcement member on site, and that Union Pacific run a lead train and a follow-up train to protect both the front and the rear, and also protect for engine failure if there was a problem. And if President George W. Bush and his family and very close family rode the train from Houston with the President George Bush, the remains in the baggage car. I'm sure your listeners have seen pictures of that. Union Pacific came up with the concept of the open, I wouldn't say open, but the plastic door where people could actually see the casket as it was passing by. The last president prior to this that used a train to move the remains to their final rest was President Eisenhower in 1969. And just coincidentally, the gentleman, Bill Howes is his name, handled that process for the B&O back in the time. I got to meet him when I was at the B&O Museum, and he was in the RNLHS. He preceded me as president of the RNLHS. So he presented to me about this whole 1969 Eisenhower train. And so I had some familiarity with funeral trains generally, but I didn't know the specifics of how this would go. I did get a chance to do a simulation with Union Pacific. I rode from Houston to College Station. They had a stopwatch. They had the Secret Service on board. We didn't use the 4141, but we did time it exactly so they would have a roadmap and they'd know exactly where they were and when they would be there.
That's amazing.
And, it was planned down literally to the second.
You remember the Eisenhower train ran from Washington all the way to Topeka, Kansas, which was a real big deal compared to just going to Houston to College Station. And it took many, many hours and a lot of trauma on that train, I want to tell you.
There was. And Bill has some stories about that. And
I'll bet he does.
And I was hoping that we weren't going to have any of that with this. And luckily we didn't.
Right.
I remember seeing the train go by with the casket and the two, I guess they were Marines that were stationed on either end of the casket. I guess they were holding on to some kind of stands. They were very, very steady. Were they bracing themselves with the moving train?
I've seen pictures of the interior of that car, and I do not think they were bracing themselves. And They were members of the military, of course, as president, as the commander-in-chief. The members of the military respectfully stood watch over the casket during the entire process.
It was beautiful. Yes, absolutely. So now tell us, where is the locomotive today and any future plans for the locomotive?
Sure. So in November of 2019, right before COVID kind of shut everything down, Union Pacific, again, very generously agreed to donate the locomotive to the library. A couple of things that your listeners probably ought to know about the locomotive. It is a shell. The diesel engine, traction motors, main generator, and some of the electronics were removed from it. It's a very low mileage locomotive. It was used in service, of course. It pulled the funeral train, but compared to locomotives built at the same time, it was very low mileage. So what you see is a locomotive, but what it is really an empty shell. So in November of 19, you talk about a flair for the dramatic. They used the big boy, the 4014, to tow the locomotive, or actually they weren't towing it at the time. It was still completely in service from Houston to College Station. They picked up myself and the foundation and several other VIP guests in Navasota, which is about 20 miles south of College Station. We rode behind the locomotive up to the dedication site, which is very close by where the locomotive was dedicated back in 2005 in the parking lot. And we had a very brief ceremony. Union Pacific officially titled the locomotive to the Bush Foundation, not the library, the foundation. And at that point, we began preparations for the move. Union Pacific, of course, towed it to Palestine, shut it down, and then brought it to Little Rock, where they prepared it for its final journey, dead in tow, back to College Station. That happened in March of 21, just this year. They brought it down on a Sunday. We loaded it on a trail. I should say I watched. I was played.
You were running the crane, right?
I was not doing any of that. I was very much a bystander in this, and they had a company out of New Jersey, and the name escapes me right now, but I do remember Union Pacific. One of the Union Pacific guys on site told me this company was the same company that fished the Sully plane out of the Hudson River when he landed the plane.
Oh, yeah.
They were the ones that fished it out, and that was sort of a big selling point for Union Pacific. If they can do that, they can certainly move a locomotive from the tracks over to the library. So on Sunday, they picked up the locomotive, they mounted it on the trailer, they brought it over to the library, we parked it, and on Monday, we actually moved it into its final position. It's actually today, it's sitting in front of the library, wrapped in a gray plastic tarp. It looks like a giant whale sitting on our front lawn, and it's actually an archivally sound tarp. It's got ventilation in it, and there's a place you can go inside and inspect the locomotive. It's wrapped in such a way that when the wind blows, the tarp's not rubbing the paint off the locomotive either. And that's the way it will remain for the foreseeable future. The plan is, and I can't go into detail. I can tell you sort of generally what we're doing. Okay. A building will be built around it, and it will be in a completely climate-controlled building, which is a little bit of a change from the original plan to have an open pavilion. And in that building will also be located an HMX-1 helicopter, a Marine One helicopter, and a food service facility. And it's not going to be a destination restaurant, but it's certainly not. It's going to be a little bit better than fast food. That's one of the number one questions we get out at the library is, where can I get something to eat? Because as as the library grows and our exhibits expand, especially with the locomotive, the helicopter, and then some redoing of the main exhibit, people are spending more and more time there. I would say you need a solid 3 hours now to go through the library if you're going to watch all the video, read all the text, and certainly if you're going to visit the gravesite and pay your respects. Right. So that plan that I just described about the new building will unfold between now and June 12th, 2024. Why June 12th, 2024? That would have been President Bush's 100th birthday. Wow. And so that's sort of our target date for completion. My assumption, and this is just an assumption, is that it will actually be completed ahead of that. And certainly when people come up, you drive by, you'll be able to witness the construction in progress. It's right along the road when you enter into the facility.
What was that date again, Bob?
June 12th, 2024. I call that kind of the drop dead date, or the farthest end point.
Right.
But the foundation is sort of quarterbacking all this. They're working with the architect. They're working with Texas A&M University and all of the interested parties that want to make sure this is done right, and doing justice to all the different components.
Well, everything's been done right so far, so I think it'll once again be an amazing success, and we look forward to seeing it.
A restaurant would be a great idea up there because, people get hungry in 3 hours.
They do, and since we open at 9 o'clock in the morning, that first group of people, or 9:30, let me correct myself. That first group of people, if they do spend 3 hours, they're done right around lunchtime, and we certainly would like them to stick around. And it also will be event space, Jim, and so we'll be able to host after COVID and after all that clears out, we'll be able to host large events in there, featuring the locomotive and the helicopter, kind of as the centerpiece talking points for that. For the events that happen in that space.
Now, this helicopter is like what they use from the White House over to Andrews Air Force Base, right?
Correct. It's called HMX-1. It's flown by the Marine Corps, and we've already negotiated with the Marine Corps, and they have selected a helicopter for us. But as your listeners may know, the supply chain problem has really impacted the renewal of that fleet. We were supposed to get it a couple months ago, but because of delays in production for the new helicopters, they're going to continue using the older models for a little bit longer.
I see. Well,
Awesome.
that's very interesting. The UP engine and a U.S. Marine helicopter in the same building.
And of course, I flew in helicopters in Houston, so my ears perked up when you talked about helicopters. So,
well, you'll see it. I don't know how it will be displayed yet. Those are still questions that remain unanswered. And likewise with the locomotive, will you be able to get up, look in the cab? Will you be able to walk on the gangway? I don't know. And
well,
so,
I want to have lunch in that helicopter.
well,
I don't think that's going to be dining in the helicopter.
Yeah, I will say definitively that food will not be permitted in the helicopter.
No. Guys, we got to take another break here for one more segment. In the next segment, we're going to talk about the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, of which Bob is the president. This is the Train Station on TNCRadio.live. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back.
Kathy DeCaro is nothing short of amazing. She not only drives the world's biggest truck as a heavy equipment operator in northern Alberta, Canada. She's an international motivational speaker and the author of Dream Big, an autobiography about overcoming a lifetime of trauma and abuse that led to dreams of success. Kathy inspires people the world over to change their lives and improve their self-worth. Her book will change your life. She's passionate about personal growth and believes anyone can change their circumstances and overcome their obstacles if they believe in themselves. Her life will amaze you and seriously inspire you. Be sure to order a copy of her book, Dream Big, on Amazon.com.
Be sure to catch the Truckers Network radio show with your host, Shelley Johnson, weekdays at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on TNCRadio.live. This is TNCRadio.live, and this is the Train Station. Welcome aboard. I'm Bill Waldrop, along with Jim Leaders, and our guest today is Bob Holzweiss of Texas A&M's George Bush Presidential Library and Museum. Now, along with that, and you're a very busy fellow with all of this, you are also the president of an organization called the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, and has been since May of 2010. Tell us about the organization, when it started, and what it does.
Okay, Bill, thank you. I have been president since 2010. Before that, I was 1 year as executive vice president. The Railway and Locomotive Historical Association, our bread and butter, our primary product is a publication called Railroad History. It comes out every year, twice a year. It features original scholarship on railroads, a variety of railroads. So if you're interested in a particular railroad, let's say Penn Central, you may see some content on Penn Central. You probably won't see it in every single issue. There's also book reviews in there. That's one of our most popular features. So if there's a new railroad book coming out, we get experts in the industry, either active or retired or academics, to do book reviews for us. So it's sort of your one-stop shop for some interesting reading. In this current issue that I'm holding in my hand right now, we have a feature on Amtrak, of course, because it's the 50th anniversary of Amtrak. We also have an article on Erie Railroad marine operations in Chicago, which is a place you don't normally associate with railroad marine operations. Very fascinating article. Fred Ash, a friend of mine, wrote it, and it sort of encapsulates what the railroad history is for us. It's a place you're going to find interesting, primary sourced scholarship, well-written, peer-reviewed, that you're not going to find anywhere else. We've been doing this for 100 years. This is actually our 100th anniversary in 2021. And I've just recently, in this issue, actually, there's a list of the presidents of the organization, and I learned, much to my surprise, that I am the second longest tenured president of the organization at 11 years. The number one is he's going to remain number one forever. His name is Charles Fisher. And he founded the organization in 1921, and he was president for 51 years. So he's going to retain that title forever. I don't plan on doing this for 51 or 52.
Oh, why not?
52 years.
Bob, have a goal in life.
I have goals, but I hope I live that long, Bill, but I'm not sure I'm going to be doing this for that long.
I understand.
Anyway, that's our signature product is Railroad History. We also have a quarterly newsletter, which is more of a supplement to that, which contains a lot of more organizational information about what we're doing. We have an archives at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, California. Incidentally, we have 10 chapters. One of them, the Pacific Coast chapter, is the equipment that they collected actually is the equipment that is at the museum. They were the founders of that museum, thanks to the good offices of Governor and then President Ronald Reagan, who actually signed the legislation in California that set up the CSRM. So our archival unit is out there. It is managed professionally by the staff at the California State Road Museum. We actually have an annual meeting every year. This year, I hosted it here in Bryan College Station. It's not a hugely attended event, but it is an interesting event. We try to do fun things. We went up to the Texas State Railroad, went to the Railroad Museum, the Temple Railway and Heritage Museum, and also the Brayton Fire School over at Texas A&M, where we're able to inspect the staged railroad wreck featuring a lot of obsolete Amtrak equipment. Wow. Next year, it was an interesting visit over there, especially during COVID. We couldn't go in any buildings or actually go in the equipment, but we certainly were allowed to walk around and inspect the outside, take pictures. It's not every day you get to see a railroad wreck up close and personal and be allowed to walk around it, but it's there.
Now, they do training there for fire departments and police, right?
They do. They send several tens of thousands, and I think that maybe over 100,000 a year go through there. During the summertime, they bring in international firefighters, and during the regular, what I call the fall and spring semesters, they do U.S. firefighters, and they've actually trained special response units for chemical companies and the railroad.
Right.
When they have an accident, they need to have highly specialized and highly trained first responders because you never know what you're going to encounter.
Right. Now, do they do the explosions and the fire for the guests and how they put them out and the?
They don't do it for the guests, but if you're there when they're doing it, and we were, you can witness it up close and personal.
Right. Now, they do that out at Pueblo, Colorado, at the Transportation Center.
Yes.
For the first responders, but it's the same kind of program there at A&M, right?
It is, and it's very extensive. It goes well beyond railroads. They have a ship there for they have collapses, they have car wrecks, they have water rescue and drowning, and it's if you're a first responder, it's like Disneyland for first responders, you know. Yeah. And it's very highly organized and very tightly structured, with safety as the top priority, obviously, but also the realism is about as real as it's going to get out there.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why we wanted to go.
Sure. Interesting.
So next year, our meeting is going to be in Rochester, New York. It's going to feature a couple of rare mileage excursions. Then we're going to go out to Sacramento, California in the following year. And then the following year after that, we're still a little bit on the fence. It's a little bit too far to plan. A couple of major events are coming up, though, in sort of the global railroad history field. One of them is the bicentennial of railroading in the United Kingdom, which I believe is in 2025. That's a huge, tremendous, kind of a worldwide event. But that'll be followed in 2027 by the bicentennial of U.S. railroading in the United States, the founding of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And so I expect as we approach those major milestones, we'll be hearing more information about the major events that will be around there. The Stockton and Darlington Railway in UK is the first railroad, and I've already had some preliminary conversations with the folks that are planning the events around that bicentennial, and the RNLHS, I think, will be a part of it. I hope I will be a part of it, but I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. We certainly, I can guarantee, will be a part of whatever the bicentennial events are in 2027. And of course, our publications will focus on history leading up to that, informing it and explaining it. So we won't just show up and have things happen. You'll actually, if you join the organization, you'll be able to get sort of the backstory as we lead into those major events.
Tell us about how to join.
That's
Okay.
my next question. Do you give us the websites, not only for RNLHS but also the Presidential Library? Tell them, the operating hours and things like that, so people can come visit all these things.
Okay, sure. So the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society is pretty simple. It's rlhs.org. We're about to redesign our website. It's not quite there yet, but right now you can sign up online. You can print out an application and mail it with a check if that's what your preference is. But also, if you're a little bit still on the fence about, what do they do? How do they do it? We have a catalog of all of our previous publications are online. Not the publications themselves, but sort of a thumbnail sketch of what you would see in every issue. We have a very robust back issue sale. So if there's a particular issue that interests you, you can buy it right off the website. And also, this is kind of unique to us. JSTOR, which is an organization called, it's short for Journal Storage, contacted us about 8 years ago and asked us to upload all of our content into their database. And so everything 5 years old or older, in other words, 95 years of our publications, are available in JSTOR. That comes as part of your membership. It's keyword searchable. It's very simple to use. And you can download articles at your leisure. So you don't have to buy any paper. Or if you're unsure if there's anything we have or have published that is of interest to you, you can always go to JSTOR and keyword search it. That's, again, part of the membership. As far as the library is concerned, the George Bush Library, it's Bush, BUSH 41, the number 41.org. That'll bring you to our front page. And from there, you can explore a variety of different things. We have a little bit of a virtual tour. It's not great, but it certainly will give you a taste for what you would experience when you're on site. It shows you some photos of the grave site. There's the Barbara Bush Garden if you're into the gardening, and roses. That was one of her favorite flowers, so it features a lot of different roses. And also some, what I would call some more of a basic information, where to park, what the fees are, what the hours are, and things like that. And Bill, if I may, I'd like to get in circling back to the beginning of our talk, a plug in for the Penn Central Railway Historical Society.
Of course.
That's pcrrhs.org. Not many people know about it. Penn Central is not a railroad that people run to and say, man, I want to be a part of that. But we have, I say that only half jokingly because I want to be a part of it. I'm actually a founding member of that organization, and I serve as the archivist for them. And you'd be surprised at the volume of quality information, both photographs and paper, that's out there that people are offering. So we have a publication as well 3 times a year, and you can go to the website and see sort of a thumbnail sketch of what we have, what we've done there. And I write for them on a fairly regular basis. I've also written for Railroad History, but not nearly as often because that's a lot more involved as far as scholarship goes.
Awesome. Well, Bob, it's been a real pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time. You're not busy enough. You need to find more things to do. Man, your life is scheduled for the next 20 years already. That's amazing.
50 years, Bill. 50 years. Remember?
50 years. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So, Bob, thanks again for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. Jim, good job as always. Thank you. And Bob, we want to know when you're going to have another one of the, I don't know what you call where we come up and do the rail fan stuff at the library. You going to do that next year?
So my plan is yes. Obviously, COVID has kind of put the kibosh on that. We will have one probably in November.
Good.
And for your listeners, if you're interested, that is a day-long program. It's on a Saturday. There's 4 speakers. Ken Fitzgerald is a famous, very good photographer, is usually one of my speakers, and we do talks on railroad or Texas railway history.
Right.
And sometimes we go a little bit of Oklahoma, Louisiana. And that's a day-long program, 2 sessions in the morning, 2 sessions in the evening. Lunch is included. It's usually $15 or $20 for everything. And it's always going to be in November on a non-football game weekend.
Very important.
Very important because, and it will be at the library. If the library is available and I'm able to secure the space, we certainly will have it at the library. So I hope we'll be able to resume that next year. But stand by for details.
Thank you very much, sir, again for being with us. This is the train station. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is TNCRadio.live, and we'll be back next week with another great program. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.